Welcome to the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where Wendy, Chris, and Eric explore the latest news stories, their work, and trends for creating and maintaining a healthy workplace culture.
Welcome to episode 38 of the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where we make the case that if you're not paying attention to your workplace culture as part of your strategy, you're going to be missing opportunities. We know that work matters and has value, and that people should be able to like and love where they work. And so this podcast is about that. How do we get to the place where people are valued, feel like their workplace is awesome, and that our workplace cultures are strong? And what is it that leaders and organizations need to be paying attention to on an ongoing basis to get there? And today we've decided that we're going to take a look at team building events. That's a really broad category, and for some listeners, it might call to mind the classic trust falls and silly games where you're wearing stickers on your head and walking around, or you're going to a sports play indoor thing where you're going to compete with each other. Those can be part of team development, team days, but we want to look at it perhaps from a different kind of lens. Yes, how do we build workplace culture and how do we have fun together? But maybe how do we actually get even more out of some of those days where we set aside time to be together? And we're going to examine something that we just did as a reference point and a starting point. We just had a team development day, and we also just had our company-wide holiday party. And we want to take a look at both of those things and examine them through the lens of workplace culture, team development, and see what we can learn there. Before we do that, how are you both doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for this conversation. So thanks for that setup. And we were chatting just as we were getting started here about the weather. It is very cold in Winnipeg. However, I was driving in this morning, and one of the benefits to cold weather here in Winnipeg is the sun is out. Right. And I was coming close to the office, and the sundog was out, and it was just like the car was warm by this point, but I was just like, this is a really beautiful morning, and I felt really good coming in, and part of that was, I guess, what I get to do. I get to meet up with some friends and colleagues and talk about things. Yeah. Have a lunch with you this afternoon, Eric. I'm feeling really good today, in spite of the cold. In fact, there's some benefits to it that are doing me some good right now.
And for those listeners who don't know, can you tell people who live farther south what a sundog is?
Yeah, well, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's almost like it's like a reflection off of the sun when it's really cold. It's like a cold rainbow.
Yeah,
almost.
Sort of a circular aura around the sun. There's sort of a bright ring kind of, and you can look at it. Yeah. You can't look at the sun, but you can look at the
as my 13-year-old would say, when you know, you know.
when you know,
you know. And if you're from here, you know what a sundog is.
Okay, great.
Wendy,
Chris, how are you?
I'm doing good. I just really appreciate, Chris, how you can even take minus 25 and reframe that in a positive way. That's a real gift that you have. I actually really enjoyed December and the start of January and the cold weather. It feels kind of insular. It's like you got this little cocoon and you start to think about moving into the holidays. And then towards the end of January hits and it's okay. And then towards end of January, it's like, where's my mitts and my hat? I'll have to start looking for the sundogs when it's winter feels like it's been extended too long.
Yeah,
I'll remind you if you're having a down day. Look for the sundog, Wendy.
Look for the sundog. That's right. Right on. Well, let's dive into our content for the day. And just a reminder to listeners, we always start by reviewing something that's related to workplace culture, leadership and workplace culture. Sometimes it might be an article or a current event. Sometimes it's just a thing we've been talking about and thinking about here because of our work with clients or our own work. And then we always follow that with some rants and raves. And so we're going to get to that in the show today too. Chris, you have a rant, I think, about somebody who was let go in not a good way.
Sure do, yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And I actually have the opposite rave, which is about somebody who was let go in a good way, at least as good as that can be, kind of interesting. And Wendy's going to share sort of a rant and a rave that came out of some customer service she experienced, and that's got you thinking about culture. So that's
Nice.
something you can look forward to at the end of our show today, as well as we'll always end the show with some practical, actionable insights,
Sure.
strategies that come out of our conversation. So I wonder, Wendy, if you could start us off by talking about and describing for the listener what we did for our staff day, which we had last week.
I would love to. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so I'll give a high level overview for our
Yeah.
listeners of what our day entailed, and then we'll unpack it a little more in terms of the details. And so people who are thinking about their staff day or team building time will have some practical ideas for them to spark off of. So we had planned our day ahead of time. And what we decided to start the day with was some really practical training for all of us around some new content that we had developed in emotional intelligence. And so we had 2 hours together where we talked and shared ideas around emotional intelligence, but it was led by a facilitator, one of our own facilitators here on staff. Then we moved to a bit of a coffee break time, and Eric, you led us through more of an informal staff meeting where we talked about some policy changes and some sort of general items that would be of interest to the entire staff. We did some celebrating as well
Sure
to
did.
follow that. There was some learning that had happened with our staff that we kind of, as a group, celebrated that. And we also recognized a group of people who have been with our organization for 10 years plus with a bobblehead
Yeah, for
that Eric has sitting in front of him.
I've got my bobblehead here, so if you're a listener and not a viewer, if you want to see and go to our YouTube channel, you can see my little bobblehead. It's very cute. I'm not going to describe myself as cute, but the bobblehead is cute, and it says Eric on the bottom, and it's me in one of my shirts, and it kind of even looks like me.
It's accurate. I don't think we would have put the
fairly
name there. I
accurate,
think we
right?
know who
Yeah,
it
I
is
think
now.
they did a pretty good job.
It's got the goatee, right?
Right.
It's got the shape, head bobbles. A lot of fun.
Well, after the bobbleheads, we broke for some lunch, which was provided, and we all had some time to gather and to eat and to chat about things connected to work and not connected to work. Then we moved into our afternoon section where was really valuable time. We created a really big timeline where each department marked on their busy season and what was coming up for them. And then we wrapped up our day by looking at some of the polarizing conversations that may enter our workplace. We have a very passionate staff who are passionate about their work, but they're also passionate about ideas and things that are going on in the world outside of work. And how do we have those conversations in a really welcoming and a safe way within the workplace? That's sort of a big high-level overview of what we did for our staff time. I'm curious if we can shift gears from the agenda of our time together to what was some of our learning in that day.
Yeah, I don't have a bobblehead yet. I have not been here for 10 years. It's only been a couple that I've been on staff. Of course, been a trainer for about 6 or 7 years. So I've had a few staff days now. And one of the things I've really appreciated about them is a couple. One, the fact that it's done just is a statement in and of itself. I remember the first staff day, I was like, wow, this is an investment. This is a commitment. So just fundamentally the fact that it is done and it's everyone participates at all levels and there's no excuses for not. We're expected as executives to make sure our schedules are clear and free. So it was the commitment is one, that's great. And then the buy-in at all levels, I think, is important. But for me, what I've really appreciated about them, and this last one was no exception, was the level of connection I feel with the entire organization as a result. Not just the folks I talk to every day. We've got a fairly diverse group of people as far as their responsibilities. So I don't get a chance to interact with everyone. And so through these, I've had a chance to really connect and get to know my peers on a level that I didn't know before. And the benefit for me is I've been able to just get to know people, as I like to do, but I've picked up on some skills and some resources that I wouldn't have otherwise known that were there. And that was picked up through some of the activities, through some of the discussions. that wouldn't just under the normal course of business have been as obvious to me. So I've just, every staff day I leave feeling a deeper connection to those, my peers, and then to the organization overall.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, when I think about outcome, one of the things that I really, really, really like is that I get to talk to people in a different way than I do in my ordinary course of work, and cross functionally, right? I see people from different departments put in small groups together, working together, laughing together, learning together, and having ahas together. Mm-hmm. And that, I think that's super cool. And I always come away feeling like, oh, I have a deeper appreciation for that person or their work or what their struggles are with work right now, or sometimes personally, but that, the connection you're talking about, Chris, is the thing that I see as a real big outcome. We are a learning organization. We're an organization that puts on learning events, obviously. And so we would be remiss if we didn't do that ourselves for ourselves. So we need to do that. That's important to us. We value that. But I also feel like probably every organization should do that. I can't really think of an excuse why you wouldn't take some time to learn together. I mean, I know that some organizations are very complex and you can't bring 1,000 people together easily, and some organizations have to operate in a different way than we do. But still, I feel like you can go and you can do your trust falls and do a ropes course. And let's contrast that with let's sit down for 2 hours and learn about emotional intelligence and think about the outcomes of those. And I'm curious, Wendy, you've done both of those kinds of things in the past, here and elsewhere. What's the difference?
Oh, I think there's a big difference. And if we would outline some of the different activities that, our organization has done, but other organizations have done, we know that like the trust falls, the going to the escape room, the bowling nights out, those are fun. And
they're awesome.
And some of us enjoy them more than others. So in those regards, there needs to be, from my perspective, and there's a lot of research that says those should be an opt-in or an opt-out.
Oh, yes.
What do we do as a whole organization? What warrants stepping back from work and saying we're going to all gather and dedicate a chunk of time away from work to be together? And so it needs to be something that's applicable, it's valuable, and builds community within your group. And, in preparation for this podcast, I did a quick little Google search around, team days, staff days, and there is so much negative. There was so much negative response around. One individual said, our boss decided that we had to get together, and they had a disco ball, and we were supposed to do some disco dancing. And he said there were some people who completely got into it, and there were others that were just really feeling really awkward and uncomfortable. So I think the agenda and being really intentional about what the time is set aside to do is pretty important. What's important for the whole staff to be a part of? What are we celebrating? What are we recognizing? What are we learning about each other? And what are we learning together? I think those are really key points when we think about taking time.
You said something important, or you said quite a bit important in there, and I'm interested. I would love to have been a fly on the wall with the disco dancing.
I might have liked it. I don't know.
Team building, yeah. I think one of the reasons I've found staff days as they're run here successful is I really feel that they are actually. I do feel that they're a reflection of our values as an organization and our culture.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel, while it's intentional, and we do plan it, it feels like us. So it doesn't feel awkward. It doesn't feel we actually have some uncomfortable conversations, which is part of the process, but it still feels safe. It feels like home, feels like who we are as an organization. And I find, having been part of other organizations, when there are those more of a scripted staff day, it doesn't feel like you as an organization, or maybe it actually does, which highlights maybe some deeper lying cultural issues.
Yes.
And I think that's why that it can get such a bad rap. And Wendy, as you mentioned, it's great to go out bowling and doing those extracurriculars. But I think when we say let's build connection after hours, we're really saying we don't really value connection like we do perhaps the
Right.
the strategic aspect of work. And we need both. And I think there's nothing wrong with doing those extracurriculars. In fact, I support them if it's an opt-in, opt-out. But don't leave that to be your only opportunity to build a connection. Because I think if you do, again, that's probably a reflection of your organization,
Right.
your values and your culture.
And the activities like disco dancing or a ropes course might be a reflection of an individual's preference for fun rather than, or the committee that planned it, whatever it might be, rather than what, might broadly appeal.
Yeah.
And like you said, Wendy, what do you value and what's worth bringing everybody together for? So we did 2 hours on emotional intelligence. We actually booked a training space outside of our offices. We all went over there. It was a short walk from our office. And we all went over there. And then we had a professional facilitator. We happened to have some of those on staff, which is very nice. And we had him go through some brand new emotional intelligence material that we've put together that we provide to clients as well. But we said our staff needs to understand and know this material as well as valuable. And so Dan led us through 2 hours of time together on content. And it was fun.
It was.
Like we told stories.
Sure.
We laughed. We talked with each other in small groups. We learned. One outcome I saw is there was a matrix that had different sort of emotional temperature and energy. I don't remember exactly what the two axes were, but it graphs out 100 different emotions in a very colorful kind of way. And I see tons of people have those printed out now in their workspaces. And the one outcome was people are aware that it's helpful to understand your emotional state, because if you don't, you're going to make decisions that might not be awesome. They might be reflective of the way you're feeling right there in that moment, but maybe you want to wait till a time until you have a different emotion going on because those emotions. Anyway, so we learned about those sorts of things, very practical, but we also built our team. It felt like at the same time.
Without question, you're right, Eric. There was definitely some practical takeaways. So obviously the training content itself was good. Dan did a great job with that. So that was definitely a win. And what that gave us is language that everyone participated in. So this was not just a group. This was the entire organization. So that's language. And we've seen examples of that. Wendy, you and I have talked about certain elements of that training. I had some conversations. The next day was our staff holiday party. I ended up having a bit of a conversation about that. So it became something for us to discuss, a language that was there. And you also mentioned it was building that connection. I'm thinking about the folks I sat at a table with through that. And I learned some insight from some coworkers that I probably wouldn't have learned. Help me know them in a better way. That's going to definitely, it helps as far as my connection with them, as far as how they like to hear and receive information. And one of the folks shared something about themselves. We're talking about our differences at home versus work. I'm like, I want that in work. And it created an opportunity to invite a part of somebody in that for their own reasons. We decided just to kind of keep that at home. And you got to, so definitely practical skills. But I think even the bigger value beyond that, as good as the training was, it goes back to that connection, because you just see those benefits in how the work gets carried out, and then how we experience the work.
When we understand each other, we can trust each other. We can care for each other and trust each other. And when we trust each other, we're much more likely to go to somebody and say, I need help, or let's work on this together. Let's collaborate. 100%. So those things, while one of the problems with let's go do a ropes course together, or let's go do whatever, an escape room, is when we do something that increases stress responses in our body, it doesn't necessarily lead toward greater trust. Right. It can actually, I associate my team now with stress rather than with other positive emotions and chemical responses in our body. And what we want to do with team building is not put people into a space where they're now stressed and creating a trauma bond, but instead, take people through maybe some uncomfortable conversation, but in a way that builds safety, builds a container in an organization that can hold some heat.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about a container that holds heat. I think the structure of an all-staff day and the content both need to be given consideration, and that the way that we structure a staff day needs to reflect what our values are. So,
Absolutely.
one of our values is togetherness. So, Chris, that links to you learning about, a colleague, a coworker, and saying, hey, no, we want that here at work. And also, I was thinking about as you were saying that, the structure of the time and the spin-offs. We also, the three of us sitting here, we had a part to play in that day, but we had a lot of staff
Yes, we
contribute
did.
and take part in actually leading specific parts of our staff day. So it brought us together, not just in the content and what we were learning and what we were talking about, but actually how we structured and planned for the day ahead of time and who was leading it.
Yeah,
And I think that's important.
I think it is important. Let's just share openly about this. I think there's a story within this that's worth sharing that speaks to your point, Wendy. When we in the afternoon, as you walk through the agenda, one of the things we did with staff is engaged in how should we handle polarizing or difficult conversations within the workplace. And if you listen to podcast was a 37, you actually hear us unpacking this idea a little bit conceptually. So if you're listening to the cast, I encourage you to go back one and listen to this. We thought this is important for us to talk about as an organization. And as an executive team, we got together and said we should do something. And it was very quickly in our meeting where we realized we're kind of coming up with this plan in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Let's engage with the team on this. And we tapped a couple of really bright folks on the shoulder and said, hey, are you interested? Here's what we want to do. And they took that and ran with it. And when I sat back, and I was able to sit back and watch that exercise unfold and the value that came from it, that would have never have been accomplished if we had just sat, as a leadership team, said, here's exactly what we need to do. We had some loose parameters where we wanted to, and then we engaged. And as a result, it led to a better outcome. Again, for me, gave me an opportunity to see some skills that I knew existed, but didn't get to see them in action with some of my peers.
Yeah, right.
It was wins all around. But again, when you mentioned it being a reflection of the culture, I believe that. Because I remember when we were talking about it, I can't remember which of you said it, but said, should we really be talking to staff? In that moment, that was our values. That was both togetherness and authenticity, I would say, reflected in that moment. We caught ourselves. Yes, we should. And then their experience, I think, was very reflective of the organization.
What I appreciated about that is I didn't have to lead it for it to be valuable, and you didn't have to lead it, and you didn't have to lead it for it to be valuable. We could let others shine. And then I got assigned to a small group, and I didn't have to choose the small group I went into. And as a CEO, that's a little awkward. Like, well, I don't know. I don't want to make people uncomfortable, but I got assigned to a group with two very junior employees. It was great.
Sure.
I learned stuff
Oh,
that I didn't know, and it didn't. I feel like it was a good, positive, open conversation. Anyway, I loved it. I loved just being a participant like everybody else and saying we co-create our culture,
Right.
and it
Yeah.
isn't always from the top. Others contribute and lead and help us design how we're going to do things together. And so that to me was really, really important.
I love that's beautiful. Co-create. We often talk about organizations, but we really are organisms, right? We're moving, we're shifting, we're responding. It's not a static thing, and we want to do that together.
As a
And
collective.
staff days should reflect that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. Again, that we couldn't have had that, or I'm not saying we couldn't. It wouldn't be an impossibility, but it'd be a lot more difficult to have an environment like this if we didn't do things like that with intention.
Yeah.
Set that time aside. Again, I've said I've participated in 3 or 4. You all have been part of them for. So think about that. Like for me, so 18, 19 months in, if I think about how I've integrated into the organization, those are some of those really, when we're out doing work with organizations, talking about critical moments
Yeah.
that are culture forming, those are critical moments. And it expedited how integrated I felt with the organization's culture.
Yeah.
And I learned things. I don't think we would have this environment the way that we do without doing that.
That's cool.
So I think it's not a nice to have. I think it's more of a must have if you really want to
Must
create
have.
that.
I had a lot of friends after the fact, I'm always talking about work, asked me, so was this a paid day for staff? And I thought that's a curious question, and in some organizations, apparently it's not.
Right.
And I think I would advocate strongly that if you're asking staff to participate in a day, it should be.
Well, that's boy, it's a recipe for resentment. I have
Isn't
to give up
it?
my
Of
free
course.
time to go spend a day or an evening. So this is where I feel like, okay, if we're going to go out to a bowling alley or we're going to go play an escape room together or whatever, that's discretionary time and nobody should be forced to go. It should be an invitation.
Agreed.
People can go, they can connect. That's not paid work time. That's just
Yeah.
let's go have some fun. Whoever wants to go will go. By the way, work's going to pay for it maybe, or maybe not, but
Right.
whatever. That's fun. And we need to have a variety of fun ways for people to connect throughout the year. But that's not team development. That's not staff development. If you're saying this is important enough for us all to be there, you should be paying for it.
Yeah, something I want to add here. It just popped because this is something we've been talking about. Let's stop separating staff development from work.
Yeah,
It is work,
Right.
it is
Yeah.
work.
right?
That's a very good
So-
point.
And what we talk about Dan Dirksen, who's been on the podcast before, one of the things he makes the case for, work isn't fundamentally a bad thing.
No.
So actually, we're built to be productive as humans. So building, and we're also built for connection, right? We're hardwired
Right.
for it. We need it. This isn't an add-on. This is doing the work. So I agree with you, Wendy. I kind of laughed when you said, was it a paid day? And I realized that's the perception people have. But I think that's one of the things we're up against.
Mm-hmm.
You'd pay someone to connect with each other? Yeah, because that's
Yeah.
work. And that's what work is about, right? It's not just about the inputs and the outputs. And the benefits to those connections is those inputs and outputs increase with a lot less stress if it's there. So I think we need to shift the narrative a little bit that this actually is work. So of course it would be paid.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like as a leader and as a business owner, I want my team to work well.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
You and me
I
both.
want
Yeah.
us to experience this workplace as a great place to be, a place where I can collaborate. I know my colleagues well enough that I trust them and I can collaborate. And so for me, bringing all the staff together, while I can look at it and go, well, that's X number of thousands of dollars in salary. Boy, that's expensive. On the other hand, I can say that's an investment I'm making
Right.
in sort of adding whatever nutrients to the soil that is the culture of our workplace, so that we can grow in healthy ways and really become a strong workplace culture. So I'm just like a farmer will buy fertilizer for their field or spread manure on their field so the plants grow well. A team development day can be like that. And that's where I think some organizations are missing out because they think that a team development day should just be fun.
Right.
Well, fun is fine.
Sure.
But we can have fun in the service of the organization. And some of the stuff we did wasn't fun per se, but it was important and valuable. When we talked about how our leave of absence policy is changing, that's sort of normal staff meeting stuff. We spent a little bit of time on that. That's not really fun, but it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did things like you described a timeline activity, Wendy, where each team met with, or project team or work team, whatever the team is, to map out what the next 6 months looks like and what are all the big projects. And then we collectively put that all on this long piece of paper and we mapped it out and we described it. That's actually kind of hard work, but it's really different work than we're used to doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's happening is, the marketing team is mapping out the projects, and then a team you're leading, Chris, around a project or whatever is mapping out his projects. Right. And Wendy, a team you're leading is mapping out his projects, and we're describing them to each other. And all of a sudden we're going, oh, that's why March feels like that. Or, oh, I really understand now that when I go to ask you about this at this time of year, that's why you're so stressed. And we're building this understanding. Right. And so we start with learning and a lot of fun and emotional intelligence. We move through some less fun stuff. Then we have celebratory stuff. And then we map out what work looks like. All of these things are building our understanding of who we are and what we're doing together.
Yeah. And Eric, I really appreciated when we were talking about the timeline, you phrased it as we want to have empathy for each other and for the other departments that we may not have a level of awareness around in terms of their busy seasons and their workload. Mm-hmm. And so the goal was actually, and the structure was representing our values as well. And then there were so many other spin-offs. Like that timeline activity, I learned so many things about other departments. And I'm working on one project in particular, which it's so slow moving. It's important, but it's not off to the races. It's like, it's really digging in and plotting one step in front of the other. And it was so motivating to hear from other departments, some of the projects they've been working on and what they were anticipating coming up next month and the month after. So there were multiple spin-offs for some of them that were unanticipated, but very positive for the activities that we did.
You know, as you're saying that, one of the things that's still bouncing around in my head, something you said earlier, Eric, was about maybe for larger organizations, it's difficult to bring people together. And I understand there's some logistics to it. And I've heard that before. And it's almost like it's a convenient excuse not to do something that needs to happen. And one of the things, as you're talking there, when I was thinking, we planned it out, we knew what was important, but we weren't looking for perfection.
No, we weren't.
Right? We were looking, like, here's what we want to accomplish. We engaged and we went for it. So what I often find is organizations, again, I think this reflects the culture of the organization, will say, well, we need to do this. And then it is planned to the last detail.
Right.
And then if something doesn't go right, there's all sorts of judgment attached to it. And then that just pushes people away from not wanting to do that anymore. I truly believe that's a reflection of your culture in action, right? So if you're seeing that, because one of the things here is we structure it, let's go to it. We're not expecting perfection. But as a result, we're also very understanding that if we don't nail something, that's okay. We tried it.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think that is a result of the size of an organization. You can do that at 200. You can do that at 2,000. You can do it at 20,000. It's going to look a little bit different, but again, that's a reflection of your culture. So, and when you're doing something internally, you don't need to nail it.
No, and you can set it up that way. You can say, we're going to try something today.
Yeah.
And we trust that all of you who are really bright people are going to figure out ways to make the most of this and work with this and give the planning committee feedback so we can improve the next time. But we're doing this in the spirit of learning together.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if it's a flop, it's a flop. And then there's learning in that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and maybe one of the nail it or one of the objectives is simply to have the event, right? To make sure that we prioritize it, we plan it as best as we can, and then we iterate on it for the next time. We learn things about what worked, what didn't, and how we structured it, what was important, and we do it better the next time.
As you're saying that, talking about events, can we step away from the staff day for a moment and actually talk about an event that was right after the staff day, not the same day?
Ah, yes.
A couple of days later, right? So this would fall under the extracurricular piece. So for those listening, our staff day was on a Thursday, and then the next day was our annual holiday party.
In an evening.
It's done after hours, and similar approach to planning that. I'm seeing some real similarities. So I'm thinking this through as I say it, but how we approach preparing for a holiday party is it's a co-created piece. It's not something that you hire. Like, I'll just be honest. I've worked in very corporate environments. I've worked in a variety of environments, of startup environments, corporate environments, and I like to say that if you really want to get a good gauge on the level of engagement in the organization, go to the holiday party and watch what's going on. It tells you lots. And it really does. And what I've found in some of the more corporate environments is it's like there's an acknowledgement, we need to do this. And a committee is formed, right? And it's put together, and basically there's a budget assigned, and they do that. There's really not buy-in from senior management at all. In fact, it's a bit of a nuisance to even go, and they kind of show up and sit at the same table and move around. And that, again, is kind of when I think about organizations I've been a part of, and I've seen it, that's how we were operating. But in this situation, yes, there is a group that does this, but that includes senior leadership. And even through that, this is brought back up. But again, we're recognizing this is important. Right? There's value placed on this, and it's building connection. So how the evening is even planned is very similar to how that staff day was planned. It's co-created.
Yeah. And to link those two, Chris, last year we had the staff day as a staff day, and then in the evening, same evening, we had our holiday event. And the feedback we got was that was a lot in one day. Yeah. And so we shifted it. Sure. So we're learning as we engage in those events.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, it doesn't have to be perfect.
No.
It's important that it happens, and we continually evolve the process.
And like your staff day, your team development day, whatever you're doing for team development, half days, full days, a couple hours here and there, it doesn't really matter. The intentionality is what matters, and the same thing is true for the holiday party. So let's create some parameters. Let's make sure that the party reflects some of our values, some of the things that we care about. Ours almost always includes some sort of acknowledgement of staff, of gratitude, of thankfulness, of let's celebrate, let's build relationships. That's almost always a part of it in some form or another. Sometimes we have little games or activities going on. Sometimes there's some trivia and fun. Sometimes there's been like the typical prize table, sometimes not. But I feel like all of that stuff is just icing. And what really matters is why we're gathering, how we acknowledge that, what we're celebrating, and the care that gets extended to the people who are there. And to me, that's what matters. That's the reflection of who we are.
100%, Eric. As you're saying that, it's just to kind of share, just to maybe add some color to this. Let's talk about the evening. Same thing. It was co-created, right? We engaged. We had to, this is the way this has been done in the past. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes maybe not perfect, as you mentioned, Wendy, with that time, or maybe some of those activities. And that's okay. There's understanding there. There's learning that's involved in there. But I'm just thinking now about this, for the listeners, this was last Friday night. The whole event ultimately became about connection. The way the night whittled down, there were folks standing kind of in the bar area having conversations. There was folks sitting around tables having conversations. We had plans to have music and some dancing. That didn't even happen because people were connecting. And I want to just, the reason I want to highlight this is, I get it. Some organizations are running on a really thin budget.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. We had a lovely event. I know that it wasn't inexpensive, but we wouldn't need to do that to create what happened.
Yeah.
But again, as I've mentioned before, go to the holiday party. That's a direct reflection of the level of engagement. And this isn't about, I understand some people might not be able to go, they have other things going on. But these events, well attended. And folks are engaged. And I think that's a reflection of it, because people wanted to have that connection that creates that still goes back to the container analogy you've been using with this.
And there was a lot of planning that went into even the seating plan. Chris, you talked about other events where, the senior leadership all sits at one table. We planned out where people would sit intentionally, so senior leadership was distributed at the various tables so they could act as a host. They could introduce people who might not know each other. And again, reflective of our values and us really wanting that evening to be about connecting.
Yeah, Wendy, one of the things you did is you brought some discussion topic cards from a game or
Hygge. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Hygge, but it's but anyway, really nice touch to have things to talk about at the table. We need to move to our rants and raves, because we're at that time of our podcast.
Already.
Okay. There's stuff. I know we could talk more about staff days and holiday parties and those sorts of things, and maybe Chris, you can wrap up some of the learnings
there is
when
so
we get
many
to
learnings. I will make sure
the
to get
takeaways
those.
for people as they think about planning their own events. But for now, let's dive into some rants and raves. Chris, why don't you take us away with your rant?
Yeah, I have a rant, something that's really been bugging me for the last few weeks. And what I'm going to share here isn't the first time I've seen this. So I heard a story recently. It had to do with an employee being let go. It happens. I understand it. It's part of work. I think it doesn't have to happen as often as it does, but it does. I recognize that it can happen. And I heard a story that I've heard repeated over and over again. And this transcends industry. This transcends all. An individual who had suspicion that their job might be on the line. No one ever talked to them about it, but they were suspicious that the job might be on the line. Got invited to a meeting under, this meeting's about something else. So under false pretenses. Thank you. And then went in and then was sandbagged with what was happening. And what upsets me so much about that is and I've debriefed these sorts of things with leaders before, and it is tough to let somebody go. But that individual knew full well. And if you talk to the management, like, no, we didn't talk about this. This is, we wanted to pull the Band-Aid off, so we didn't want to cause them any anxiety. You're causing them anxiety. When you have an employee that you're really not sure about, they know that. Because you're engaging with them in ways, but you're not saying it. And the problem with that is that really wears that individual down, because now they're full of self-doubt and all of those sorts of things. So I really believe that when we make a decision to let somebody go, it can be done in a much better way. We're filled with all sorts of excuses. Need to protect the organization. Yeah, you need to protect the organization because, again, this is a reflection of your values in action. And I think we can treat people certainly with dignity in those situations, and it's an opportunity for us to live our values. When I think about the organizations, I have a few in mind right now. None of those ways that people have been dismissed align with what they claim to be their values. And I actually don't want to go on past judgment on the organizations that have done that, but that is an opportunity, as we've done, to stop and reflect. Is this really the experience we want to create? And I think it can be done better. Just doesn't.
It's tricky. We can do a whole podcast on the mechanics of letting somebody go, because at some point you have to tell somebody. So how do you get them to the meeting? Oh, this is a meeting where we're going to tell you you're going to be fired. So I understand the complexity of that.
Yeah.
So that's very challenging. So but you're talking really about, I think part of your rant is the false pretense. Oh, we're going to meet to talk about Project X.
Yeah.
They walk in probably knowing that things are unstable, and we're not talking about Project X. Actually, now we're telling you you're fired. Instead, let's not create the false pretense. And when we make a decision, let's let somebody know.
Thanks, Eric. I think my rant is more about the lead up to getting there in the first place.
Right.
So it's not even the fact that it happened. It's how it happened. Definitely could have been done differently, but it was all of the lead up. That went up, right? And it's like, again, let's just have some conversation.
Okay.
Right. And just disappointing because it just created some suffering that just, and you've said this before, just is not necessary. Yeah.
I fixated on the part of the false pretenses as well. It's like, that's just not true.
Yeah.
That's unethical. You don't lie to people on purpose.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I have a rave about somebody being let go, which sounds very, very weird. I know. But and maybe it's just a counterbalance.
Okay.
A friend of mine working for a very large organization with thousands of employees, has been there quite a few years, sort of in the middle of the ranks in terms of senior level employee, managing a small team, that kind of person, but not too far. Anyway, so a person with some seniority experience, quite a few years of service for the organization, their position was surplused, or whatever the term is, but they were given notice on the Wednesday and given until Friday to sort of wrap things up, say goodbye, pass on projects. So it wasn't just like, you're being let go, here's your pink slip, here's your cardboard box, fill stuff in, go. Instead, it was they were treated with dignity in that. 2, they were given a very decent severance package, which allows them to land on their feet. And 3, the remarkable thing is, when I talked to my friend, they were saying, this doesn't preclude me from getting other positions within the organization. I've actually applied for a couple of others. They actually want to go back and work for the same organization because of the way they were treated in the years leading up, the way they were treated in the layoff process where this position was gone. But also that doesn't mean the door is closed for other positions in a really massive organization. So I thought that was kind of cool. Like, somebody's let go, but actually they have hope for their life because of the way they were treated. So
and they understood the context of why their position was removed.
It would make sense to them. And I think a key element in there is, and I'm barring really black and white, cut and dry, gross misconduct things. We're talking about 99.9% of these things that kind of fall somewhere in between there. Usually when we're at a point where somebody needs to be let go, there's shared contribution to that. And it's easiest to go, well, they didn't do this, therefore there's like, we contributed to that. So let's take some ownership and just do it in a better way. And that's a great example of how you can do it in a better way. Thanks for sharing that, Eric.
Wendy, you've got a rave.
Yeah, I have a quick rave. My husband and I are in the midst of making some pretty substantial life decisions. And so one of the ways that we've tried to eke out some time to actually have these conversations is to go out for dinner. And so 2 restaurants that we frequented in the last month were, in both of them, the food was good. There were options that we both enjoyed. The restaurant was clean. Like, there was nothing about the actual experience of the food in the restaurant itself that put one in a higher sort of, I want to go back to that one or not to the other one. But what set them apart was the service that really was, I believe, a reflection of the culture. So we weren't in a hurry. We sat down at the first restaurant, the one that we will return to, and they asked, is this a special occasion? Let them know why we were there, and asked, hey, do you have any recommendations? And they gave us a whole litany of ideas, their favorites. And I always can't help myself but ask people why they like where they work.
Nice.
Some fodder for podcasts
Sure.
as well. But this individual said, the story behind this restaurant is so amazing, and went on to share the history. They talked about the teamwork, the collaboration, and they also said, and our food is just so amazing. That's a restaurant I want to go back to, not just for the food, not just for, the timeliness of the service, but for the sense of, I felt invigorated just being in their presence.
The story.
Yeah.
You're part of the story now.
And they believed in what they were doing with such passion. The other restaurant, the food was fine. As I said, it was clean, was timely, asked for recommendations. Their response was, pretty much anything on the restaurant is good. What do you like about working here? They hem, they hawed. The pay's pretty good. And hint, hint, the tips aren't bad. And that was it. And so it's like, this culture, that culture was manifested by the kind of service and the response that my husband and I got. And as a customer, I know where I want to go back. And it's the one that obviously has this culture that supports great service.
Nice. I'm going to ask you for the name of that restaurant after the
Yeah.
podcast.
Well, and I also wonder, Wendy, so you talked about that, obviously create a great customer experience. I also think about the employee experience.
Yeah.
If we were to actually talk to those
yes.
2 individuals to say, tell me about work, very different experiences that they're having there. And that's a result of the culture for sure. I think you're just, you experience that. You often say your culture is your brand. And that's a great example of
And
that.
isn't that incredible? Because when we think about the experience of work, in identical work in this case that you're describing, Wendy, and in the one, somebody feels connected to the story, the meaning of their work, the passion behind it, and in the other one, the person doesn't. And you want to return to the first, as a client or customer, you want to return to the first place, even though everything else is basically identical. And I think that's so all of our listeners, and we can think about what's the thing that we do? Do our employees feel connected to the meaning of it, to the story, to what's important about it, to the value of it, so that they can then carry that forward into the work that we do, that we put out there for our clients and customers. And that, I think, is a real lesson for us about the value of connection, engagement, telling the story, etc. So with that, we're going to wrap up our podcast for this month for episode 38. We hope you enjoyed the show. I'm going to turn it over to Chris now to take us out with some actionable insights that you can take and put to work in your workplace. Take it away, Chris.
Yeah, what a great conversation. Building your team, something I'm really passionate about. And one of the real key takeaways for me here was that building connection is work. You're doing work when you're building connection. This is not something to be done. It can be done as an extracurricular, but actually is part of work, just like striving to accomplish your goals. In fact, you can't accomplish your goals if people aren't really feeling connected. So it requires intention. We can't leave it to happen organically and hope that it occurs, that people build the connection that we need. You want to plan with intention, make it relevant for your organization, make it a reflection of your culture and what you value, but set it up not just about having fun, although you can have fun through the process. Set it up so people can learn together. Set it up so people can problem solve together. Maybe it's plan together, but ultimately be together, right? So when we're doing that, the benefit is we grow as individuals, we grow as teams, and that helps us grow as organizations. Listen, folks, if you're listening to this and we've touched on some points that you feel that you can benefit from yourself, I really encourage you, check out the show notes here. We actually have a starter kit to help you do a bit of an assessment as to where your culture is at. And we encourage you to reach out to us and ask questions about how we might be able to help you out, even just through some conversation. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You could follow Wendy, Eric, and myself on LinkedIn. Follow the Achieve Center for Leadership on LinkedIn. We're always posting content up there. And of course, follow us at theachievecenter.com, where we have all sorts of resources and information for you to check out. Thank you again for taking time to be here and listening with us. We really appreciate the listener base that we have. Stay in touch with us. Share your feedback. Let us know what you want to hear more about. And until 2025, be well, and we'll see you in the new year.